I taught my dog how to talk. Not with her voice though, but with her paws. I own a 3-year-old Bichon Frise called Gidget. They are a remarkably intelligent breed, despite their yappy image. I taught her from a young age to do tricks and obey commands, and she was a bright and eager student. I always felt she had a lot to say. So when I saw videos on TikTok and Instagram of dogs who use programmed buttons to indicate their needs, I thought I might try it with Gidget. I bought a pack, recorded my voice on the buttons. I kept it simple at first. I gave her buttons to make requests and to ask for things. Outside, food, water, treat, play, things like that. After she had mastered those, I added more. I gave her options about where she wanted to go and what things she wanted to eat. She soon learned to pair the buttons up. Outside, park, food, chicken. It was amazing to hear her preferences and to know why she whined or barked. As she grew more confident, I added more buttons. These were more philosophical and used concepts rather than nouns and verbs. I wasn't sure Gidget would be unable to understand them, but she picked them up so quickly. I wished I had introduced them sooner. We discussed the weather, dreams, emotions. She was soon able to tell me if she was happy or sad, tell me she'd had a bad dream, and ask for a particular toy for her playtime. I became obsessed. Her little brain was able to express so much more than I'd ever suspected. I added more buttons. Soon she was able to tell me her mood, ask pertinent questions with the why button, make decisions based on what I suggested. She also liked to look out of the window and tell me what she saw. It was so interesting. Whilst I might look out of the window and see my neighbor carrying groceries from his car, Gidget would watch the same scene and tell me about the bird she had spotted or stray leaf she had seen caught by the wind. I was able to see the world through her eyes. She'd been using her buttons to talk for over a year before things started to get disturbing. One day, she stopped playing with her favorite toy, looked into a corner, and walked over to her board. Very deliberately, she selected the button for dark. I laughed. It was daytime, and the sunlight was shining into every corner. No dark, I told her. Light, it's daytime, no dark. I used the buttons to reinforce my message. No dark, light, day. Gidget listened, but turned her little head back to the corner. After a few minutes, she came back to her board. Dark, she said again. I'm afraid I shrugged off her words, the message behind them. I may even have laughed. No dark, I said. Light. Gidget humored me. She was a very clever dog. Sometimes whilst we played, she would stop and examine a random wall, hover by her word board, ready to tell me what she saw. But my previous reaction must have discouraged her. Time and again, she would stamp on the button for dark, and I would look at her, she looked, and deny it. I added more buttons, and with those buttons came more unease. Dark, stranger, no. Cold. I'd stand where she looked to show her it was okay. She would whine and cry and hit the stranger button. It upset me a lot. After a while, Gidget stopped using her buttons. She regressed. She stopped asking outside and would whine at the door instead. She stopped asking for food and would stand by her bowl and cry. I didn't know where I had gone wrong. I stood in the corner she hated more often, trying to understand why she hated it. It was cold there, colder than anywhere else in our home, but very welcoming. I found it soothing for some reason, but the more I stood there, the more she cried. It started to get annoying. It was just a stupid corner. I'm not sure what to do. Update: Gidget has regressed even more. She has started peeing in the house, which is incredibly frustrating. At first, I brushed it off, and then I took her to the vets. The vet said there was nothing physically wrong with her, and she seemed stressed. She's a dog. What has a dog got to be stressed about? I'm getting sick of cleaning up puddles of pee. I feel like I should punish her. Update 2. Gidget won't come near me now. I hold my hand out to coax her. She turns away. Idiot animal. I remembered that I loved her once, but that was before I realized how useless she was. She won't even love me. The main reason I got a dog in the first place. I spent more time in my corner and watched the little fluffy beast cringe in her bed. The bed I bought her that she doesn't deserve. I'm watching her now. I've been staring at her for hours now. She has done nothing except shake and cry. She used her buttons for the first time in ages earlier. Where, Mum? Mum, bye. Stupid creature. Can't you see I'm right here? My friend isn't in any condition to update her story, as far as I can tell. She apparently posted a second update that some of you may have seen, but it was removed shortly after posting. I can only imagine what she wrote in it. I don't want to use her name, but you will know her as Gidget's mom, so I'll call her GM for short. As for myself, I'm a friend who took Gidget away. GM hadn't checked in with her circle of friends for days, and when I decided to go and see her, we have a group chat we all access daily, but she had been absent from it for too long and hadn't responded to a single message aimed at her. I lived the closest, so I volunteered to go and check up on her. When she answered the door, I was horrified at what I saw. GM is normally a very tidy person who takes great care in her appearance, but when I saw her, she looked terrible. There were vast dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes were covered in stains. She let me in, and as she turned away from me, I noticed that the hair on the back of her head was matted, as if she hadn't brushed it for weeks. Even though her curtains were still drawn at 3 p.m., I could still see enough in the dim light to ascertain that her home was as messy as she was. There were dirty places piled on the floor, stale food congealing on them, and for some reason, she had put a blanket over the mirror above her fireplace. What shocked me more was the state of Gidget though. It was a running joke in our friend group that GM treated Gidget like her baby. Gidget was completely spoiled and pampered, with regular visits to groomers and an entire wardrobe of little outfits. But the small white scrap I saw cowering in her filthy bed didn't look like the princess I'd come to know and love. Gidget looked like one of those dogs they use in adverts for animal charities. She was trembling when I saw her, but she still managed to wag her tail, giving me a warmer welcome than GM had given. And she scuttled out of her bed, coming towards me in an awkward crouching gait I'd never seen her use before. I didn't know much about dog body language, but it was clear to me that Gidget was badly frightened of something or someone. I didn't like to imagine what had been going on, but judging from GM's appearance and the state of her home and beloved pet, it was an understatement to say something was terribly wrong. I'm afraid I assumed that GM was depressed. It wasn't something she was prone to by knowledge. But there was a first time for everything. I tried to be as upbeat as possible. I didn't mention how awful GM looked, but I did instinctively start to tidy up a little. I didn't know what else to do. I bustled around her flat, picking things up, recounting such news of her other friends' activities I thought she'd like to hear. GM's silence was unsettling, and being around her made the hairs on my arms prickle. It was ridiculous, but I have to admit that I was scared of her. Something was incredibly off, not just the mess or the sour smell, or GM's withdrawal, not even Gidget's cowed attitude, which I probably could have explained had I not wanted to consider what GM might have put her through. GM is, and has been, a very sweet person, totally devoted to her dog. I didn't want to think that in her current state she might have abused her baby, but I couldn't completely discount it. I felt her behind me as I tidied her kitchen. She stank, a reek like rotten meat, body odor, and old piss. I tried to keep my chatter so she wouldn't know something was wrong. And for some reason, it was very important she didn't know that something was wrong. She was like a dark shadow hanging over me, looming in fact. At one point I turned and saw a big stacked knife lying unattended and put it in the dishwasher just for something to do, so I wouldn't have to make eye contact. Now I was there, I regretted coming. It made me sick to my stomach to be in her presence. The feeling of unease I'd felt upon entering had only gotten worse. I looked around her flat for an excuse to do something else, and saw a little puddle on the hardwood floor. It looked very much like Gidget had peed there. I hoped it had been Gidget and not GM. I made my way to the mop, but GM stopped me. She was very distressed, her face right up to mine, but I could smell her breath. It was sweet with rot and thick with something meaty. She told me she didn't want to she told me she didn't want me to do anything else. Not with her voice, but with her eyes. And despite the danger I felt coming off her in waves as strong as her body odor, I couldn't just leave. I told her I wanted to help her, or something like that. I was in no fit state to form a coherent argument. You can do something for me, she said, and then I realized it was the first time she had spoken since I'd entered her flat. Her voice sounded strange, although strange isn't a deep enough word to describe it. It was guttural and thick, as though she was holding foam in the back of her throat, and the words were bubbling through. It was the voice an open grave would have if it could speak, a voice of a basement door, covered with cobwebs, held ajar with a spike of bone as a doorstep. I asked her what she wanted me to do for her, and her eyes flickered then. Maybe it was just the poor lighting, but for a moment it looked as though she had a second set of eyelids behind her usual ones, like a crocodile, almost transparent, but with a smoky glaze to them. One corner of her mouth twitched as if she wanted to smile, but then her face became serious again. Her lips moved without sound, and now her eyes bulged a little as she huffed rancid breath against my skin. There was a struggle going inside my friend, and I hoped she was winning. Take Gidget, she said, coughing the words out as if they hurt her. She was holding my arm so tightly it hurt, pinching the nerve of my elbow, until I felt my arm go numb to the shoulder. I can't remember what else she said. All I know is I wanted to leave, and quickly, and I wanted to take Gidget with me. I packed what I could, quickly as I could. The most important things like Gidget's bowls, food, and bed, and other useful stuff like her toys, leash, and harness, along with some of her cute little coats. I was ready to go when GM, sitting on her couch watching me with a blank expression, urged me to take Gidget's talking board too. I hadn't even thought of it, but it made sense. I'd always been enthralled by Gidget's board, and the way she communicated. It'd be fun. I grappled everything into my bags, breaking the board down so I could assemble it again at my house, and made my exit. Walking out of the front door made me feel as though I'd escaped from what I couldn't tell you exactly. It was just such a relief. Gidget stopped to look back before the door swung closed behind us, but I didn't. I was focused on getting out. Every step I took to get away from GM was lighter than the before. I never thought I would shirk my duties to a friend, and that I'd be so eager to leave someone in distress, but I knew GM couldn't be talked down and plied with ice cream and thick chick flicks to get out of her mood. My shoulder, which had felt many tears upon it over the years, did not want to accommodate GM right now. Gidget relaxed somewhat once she was in my car, but she still looked over her shoulder as I drove away. I couldn't understand her urge to look. Personally, I didn't ever want to see that building again. I've read about women who have been kept prisoner in places for years at a time. Colin Stan, Elizabeth Fritzl, Michelle Knight. It was a fascination of mine. I could only imagine how those women have felt looking at the houses they had kept in after their escape. And I had nothing to compare to their ordeal, but to look back at GM's building was unthinkable. I just couldn't do it. Back at my house, I took a stock of Gidget's condition properly. She was bedraggled and somehow shrunk into herself. There was nothing that a bath and a decent meal couldn't sort out. Gidget had been through a tough time, but I couldn't see signs of abuse, only short-term neglect. I bathed her, both of us getting soaked amongst the bubbles of her shampoo, and toweled her dry in front of the fireplace. She seemed a lot perkier than she had at her own home, and even expected some of her expensive food, though not as much as I'd hoped. It was probably more for my benefit than hers. I wrapped her in a blanket and cuddled her on my lap, but it did both of us good, and after a couple of hours of snuggles, she was confident enough to wriggle from my grasp and approach the bag that held her board. I dismantled it in a hurry and hadn't reassembled it yet, but she sniffed at the corner of the board sticking out and looked at me expectantly. A very real part of me did not want to put the board together again, I didn't want to know what she wanted to tell me, but the little frill of her tail twitched and her fluffy cheeks puffed out to express a single polite woof. I couldn't deny her. I laid the board out, clicking the panels into place and repositioned any loose buttons before returning to my chair and turning on the TV. I laid the board out, clicking the panels into place and repositioned any loose buttons before returning to my chair and turning on the TV. Gidget stood by her board for a while. Considering her options, I half watched her, hoping she would only ask for a treat. But Gidget had more serious stuff in mind. Mom, gone. She pressed the buttons with her little paw, then gazed at me, trying to ascertain whether I'd registered her comment. I smiled a false smile that hurt my face and replied too brightly, "Yes, Mom gone. At Auntie X's house now." I didn't know it was possible for a dog to look frustrated, but she was patient with me. She examined the board again, thinking this, then selected some more boards. Mom, dark, stranger, gone. I felt hot, like Gidget's words had turned the fire up a notch. I pretended that I hadn't heard the buttons and concentrated on the voice. The one on TV, not the one asking to get into my head. Stranger. Gidget didn't just press the button, she stamped on it, emitting a little aggravated snort. Dark, stranger, bye, Mom. A glance at me, then. Help, Mom. Bye, stranger. I pretended I didn't know what she meant. I laughed, a sound that was jagged and false. Bedtime now? I told her, turning off the TV. Do you want to sleep with Auntie X? Gidget regarded me for a long time, then appeared to give the dog version of a shrug. She sighed, and then plodded towards my bedroom, not looking at me. I'd let her down, but it appeared Gidget was a lot braver than I am. I didn't sleep well. Gidget's warm little body was a comfort next to me. But my dreams were full of troubling and indistinct images. I tossed and turned all night, waking often, and every time I woke, I would stare at the vague rectangle of my bedroom door, expecting it to be open. I dreamed that someone was leaning over me, someone with a negative intent, someone with breath that was scalding hot, and yet made frost form on my face. More than once I woke up to find out that I had pulled either of those covers on my own pillow over my head, as though I was hiding from something. My sleep that night was ragged and sparse, and when the sun finally rose, I was wearier than when I had gone to bed. I didn't want to experience a night like that again. I made coffee in the gray pre-dawn light. I didn't even think about going back to bed. Gidget joined me, looking as tired as I felt. Her perfect little white curls were scruffy and flat, her ears droopy. She didn't look at me for comfort, as I looked at her and went straight to her board and then yawned before pressing her buttons. Help, Mom, bye, stranger. She flopped down onto the floor by her board, exhausted. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the energy. I sat down with my coffee and stared at the blank TV. I thought that I should call some of her friends, but it was far too early. Everyone would be asleep, everyone except whoever was ringing my doorbell. I thought it might be the postman, though he had never called so early. Barely awake, I put my cup down and heaved myself out of the chair. Gidget was up and alert all of a sudden, staring at the door, her little body rigid, with a slight tremor running down her spine. No, she stepped on the button as I walked towards the door. It's okay, Gidget, I told her, still sleepy. Auntie X, get door. No, 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 no. He pummeled it repeatedly, ears flapping as he bounced. Stranger, no. I looked through the spy hole in my door. It gave me a fisheye lens view of everything outside. Someone was standing slightly to the left of my door, just out of sight. I lifted my hand to release the deadbolt, and again Gidget stamped on the no button. The imperative behind the robotic voice made me pause. It was a recorded version of GM's voice, made unnatural by the repetition, and the more Gidget stamped on it, the more desperate it sounded. I squinted through the people again. I could see a shoulder and most of an arm. Who is it? I asked. Never had I asked for identification before. The figure on my step moved and came into view. It was GM, looking as scruffy as she had before. She was smiling, an expression that looked strange on her crusty face. and one arm was behind her back. The other arm reached up in the attached hand and rang the doorbell again. "It's me, X," she said, sounding exactly how she should, her voice normal now. "I'm feeling better. I've come to get Gidget." It should have been a relief. GM sounded fine, and I was already exhausted from looking after Gidget. But I did take my hand down from the deadbolt. Gidget was frantic now, pouncing on her buttons just out of my line of vision. GM's metallic voice spoke to me over and over. "No, stranger, no, Mum. Stranger, dark, no." I sighed, put my head against the cool wood of my front door. "I can't let you in, GM," I said. "I don't know why, but I can't." Something thumped against the outside of the door, right where my head was placed. I moved, then stepped away, just a split second before the point of a knife appeared, piercing through the wood. I stared at it without comprehension and watched as it disappeared again. "Open the door, X," said the voice from the other side. "No." I couldn't tell if it was me or the voice from Gidget's board who spoke, but it didn't matter. The thing on my porch screamed, and I heard rapid footsteps. When I looked outside again, GM was gone. Swaying on my feet, I wondered if I had locked the back door before going to bed last night. I usually did. I'm hoping I did. But I did hear a weird squeal just now that sounded like the old hinges on my back door opening. Might just be my imagination, but for now, I am crouched in my bedroom. Gidget close by my knee, and her entire attention is trained on my bedroom door. I feel like I should call the police, but I also feel like writing this down is more important. Strange. I can hear the noises in my house. What should I do? I mean, it's only my friend out there, if anything. It hurts to write this, not just physically, but that too. I'm covered in bruises, and there may be some cuts too, but I'm alive, and so is Gidget. I know most of you are more worried about Gidget. This may take more than one update. I have a lot to process. Plus, I'm in a hospital, so I beg you for patience. After my last post, I did the sensible thing. I called the police. I sat hunched in my own bedroom, with furniture in front of the door and my friend's dog huddled by me, and called the police. I stayed where I was, on the phone, to the woman on dispatch, and listened to the police tear through my house. There were no dramatic gunfights. I live in England after all, but there were some impressive sounding footfalls pounding around. It seemed to take hours before they called all clear, but after looking at my phone, I realized it had only been 10 minutes. I came out of hiding then, clutching Gidget to my side. She was very happy to see the police officers, and even licked a couple of them. My back door was intact, the lock was still in place, and they had gained entry through my front door. They told me that didn't seem right to me, but I was very tired. And I thought that maybe I hadn't locked up my front door at all, which gives me the shivers, knowing GM could have burst through any time she wanted. They took my statement and a description of GM, and asked me if I had a friend or family member that I could stay with. It was heavily implied that they recommend I don't stay at my house, and I agreed. But although I did have places I could stay, GM knew most of the addresses, maybe all of them. We were a tight-knit group, and many of my friends were her friends, so I decided to stay at a motel. I packed the basics for me, and again, within hours, was packing Gidget's stuff. I made sure to pack her board. Gidget knew a lot more than I did. The place I had chosen was comfortable and anonymous. The decor was exactly what I would have expected, neutral and inoffensive, and Gidget had her own bed. She settled down quickly, not even glancing at her board, and fell asleep within minutes of arrival. I lay awake a lot longer, listening to Gidget's high-pitched snores and trying to process everything that just had happened. I should have assumed that GM had some kind of breakdown, but my instincts told me otherwise. The sensations surrounding me and her were far more complex and didn't feel natural at all. GM was my friend, and I felt like I could have accepted a psychological break far more easily than what I'd felt. What I'd felt was evil, when all was said and done. A separate entity from my good friend that would only be happy with my death. I tossed and turned, but eventually fell asleep to the troubled dreams. My dreams did not reflect what I'd gone through, rather they were far more mundane and irritating. I was late for an important meeting, and I was wearing inappropriate clothes, my car wouldn't start, and I tried to walk to the meeting. But I gasped, but I got lost along the way. It was a dream I'd had way too many times before, but this time, amongst the dullness of it all, little things crept in that I wasn't used to. Whilst I struggled to get my car started, there was a figure, barely registered in the background, hanging from a tree. And whilst I walked along a muddy road in heels and my old PE kit, someone was following me and was always ducking out of sight when I turned around. I didn't sleep well, but when I woke up, the newly grey dawn filtered through the curtains. Gidget was still asleep, and I counted that as a positive thing. I let her sleep. I'd laid her food and water bowls down where she could easily find them, and assembled her wordboard should she feel the need to communicate, so there wasn't much else I could do for a sleeping dog. With nothing else to do myself, I opened my phone and started scrolling. There was a message from there was a message bubble from my Facebook Messenger hovering on my screen. GM's face was in the bubble. I ignored it, although pulling down the notifications at the top of my phone screen told me she had sent me a disturbingly garbled message I couldn't translate. WhatsApp had a new message for me, but a quick glance told me it was also GM. Again, a first glance showed only disturbing nonsense. I swiped away that notification too. I was still tired and did not want to be reminded about GM. Another message awaited me on Instagram. I checked all my apps. LinkedIn and TikTok and YouTube also had messages from me. My new Reddit account had similar notifications. Even my bank app had a fresh message that I did not want to read. And whilst it was impossible for GM to access my bank app to leave me a message, it was indeed from her, or whatever was inside her. Everywhere I went, GM was waiting for me. I opened Google, I'm not sure what I was going to search for, but whatever it was left my mind when I saw the Google logo. I know Google changes the logo to a picture for special occasions, but I couldn't imagine what the occasion could be that would require a grainy, particularly animated photo of a door. It was in black and white, flickering slightly, and looked all too familiar. For a second, I thought it might be the door to the motel room I was staying in. Somehow it was almost worse than when I recognized as the door to my bedroom, where I was barricaded last night. The thought that Jim had been outside my room whilst I was on the phone to the police and had possibly taken a photo of my door while she was at it, that was disturbing. I closed my Google app without searching for anything. I didn't want to know what might come up in the results. Kizet and I remained in the motel for nearly a week. The police told me that they had done a welfare check on GM and hadn't been able to locate her. There was no sign that she had returned to my house either, but I couldn't bring myself to go to home. I felt reasonably safe where I was, but I knew I couldn't stay there indefinitely. I was low on funds, and my sick time at work was running out. Besides, the more material reasons, being there made me feel like I was on the run, paranoid, scared all the time, twitchy, and anxious. I couldn't live like that, and the bad dreams had not left me. They were normal dreams I was supposed to be having. Dreams I had often in various shapes and forms, ones that were apparently common if online dream dictionaries are to be believed. But there was a darker tinge to each of them, and that made everything worse. If I dreamed about my teeth falling out, there'd be a hand stained red extended ready to receive them. If I dreamed about being back at the school, there was always something underneath my desk or in my locker I didn't dare to look at. And if I dreamed about falling, there was always something dreadful waiting for me when I reached the end of my fall. And in every dream, a shadowy figure lurked in the background, never acknowledged, but always noticed. I'd really done nothing to deal with the situation I was in, just survived. Gidget had tried her best to explain to me what had happened, but her buttons were very limited. All I could ascertain was that something was dark, and GM was now a stranger. I ventured onto the internet again. Messages still waited for me, but the Google logo had turned to normal, which was a comfort. There were many things that I could have looked up, but the one I chose to do was to find out where Gidget's button had come from and order some more. I'm not sure why I did this, but I had a few ideas I wanted to try out. The new buttons arrived quickly. I agonized over what I would record. How could I ask a dog to express something I didn't understand myself? I allowed myself a little indulgence. I knew what I suspected based on my feelings around when I'd gone to GM's home. But I didn't know how to translate them into something Gidget could relate to. I started slowly, recorded my voice onto the new buttons. It made me terrified, but I did it anyway. Gidget's name and mom were already there, so I recorded my name on one button. Then I recorded a couple more options. Gidget was such a clever dog. I don't think that we as humans really appreciate the level of intellect a dog can have. GM had told me about Gidget's understanding of dreams, but I don't think I really acknowledged that such an abstract thought could be expressed by a little scrap of white fur. And the things I wanted to discuss were such odd concepts. I taught her dog and human. Might seem strange that those words it might seem strange that those were the words I chose to record, but bear with me. Gidget, dog. X, human. GM, human. I know. I knew she had some dog friends she associated with, so I used their names to reinforce that I had showered with. That I had. Sorry. I know she had some dog friends she associated with, so I used their names to reinforce what I had showed her. Sparky, I said, and hit the dog button. Rebel, I said, and I hit the dog button. Once it got a hang of that, I tried the human version. I named all the people she might know and hit the human button after each one. She watched me closely, absorbing everything, and it wasn't long before she could answer my questions with her two new buttons. I named everyone she knew, dog or human, and she answered appropriately, working out that dogs and humans were different. I gave her a treat every time she was correct, and it was every single time except when I mentioned GM. But she didn't press the human button when I said GM's name or said mom. She had no button to press for her. GM was apparently not human or dog. I thought again for a long time before I could record another button. I made a button for animal. I wanted to be sure Gidget understood that whilst we were all animals, not all animals were dog and human. She knew cats, of course, and having been friends with a local cat, but she also knew cows and horses from her walks. Still, she could tell me that Benjamin, a human, was a human, that Misty, a cat, was animal, that General, a horse, was animal. But when I said GM's name, or Mom, again, she did not respond for a long time, until she finally seemed to be getting frustrated with me. And then, final time I mentioned GM, Kishet stamped on her board. Stranger, dark, Mom, bye. I knew what she was talking about. That was the worst thing. I knew when I was with GM, she wasn't GM. It wasn't just a dissociative episode. GM wasn't GM. She was something else. And from what Gidget had told me, it had to do something dark in their house. Looking back, when I had taken Gidget away, there was a corner of a room in GM's that I hadn't liked. There was no reason for me to dislike it. It looked no different. But there had been a puddle to the floor near that corner. I thought that might be Gidget's pee, and I wasn't going to clean it, but GM had stopped me. She didn't want me near that corner, and to be honest, I didn't want to go near that corner either, though I couldn't tell you why. It was a relief when she had stopped me. I think whatever had happened to GM had something to do with that corner, and it was why Gidget didn't think of her as human, so I thought again, wrestled my thoughts, actually. How could I allow Gidget to express herself? I was still pondering over how I could help Gidget help me when Gidget's demeanor changed. She went stiff, digging her little paws into the motel room carpet, and cocked her head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. She growled, once, a tiny sound almost buried deep in my throat, and looked over my shoulder. I felt paralyzed. All the fear I'd been experiencing in the past days suddenly brought to a head. Stiff Gidget did a strutty little walk over to her board, and looking over her shoulder the whole time, stamped on her buttons. Stranger, Mum. She hesitated and considered all her buttons. I don't think the word she needed was there. So she tried to adapt. Home, she said. Home? Whose home? Was GM at my house again? Where, Mum? I asked, my tongue almost glued to the roof of my mouth. It felt As though all my saliva had evaporated, Gidget looked over my shoulder again and gave me a little shudder. Home, she said, pressing the button with a stiff paw. But then I remembered GM's world had revolved around Gidget, and she had a little saying I had heard more than once. Home is where Gidget is, GM would say. She snuggled her dog. Gidget was here, so maybe this was home, and maybe GM was here. I have to stop now. I'm sorry to leave you all hanging, but I will update as soon as I can. I have statements to give to the police and medical attention to receive, so hang tight. I'll be back to tell you the rest.